Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Mahavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both, nourish us both. May that one give us vigor in our work and strength and excellence in our studies. May we not necessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Well, good evening, and we continue, wherever you are, we continue to study 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, a very short, significant chapter of 20 stanzas. Significantly called Purushottama Yoga, since it's dedicated to the glory of that supreme principle. And so last week, we covered many useful concepts. And then it struck me that people who are joining for the first time may not know at all why we're studying the Bhagavad Gita in the first place. You see, we have a curriculum here for the schools in the secondary level. And traditionally, in a Christian country, it is the Christian text, scriptures, are studied. And when I say studied, gone into intricately with intricate examination questions and so on. Only recently did they include other religious texts. And there was some controversy as to whether Hindu and Buddhist texts should be included. And finally, after some persuasion, they managed to say, please study only one text for Hinduism. It is not complicated in the face of any objection that says it's very complicated and we won't have time for it. But although it is the largest philosophical poem in the world, the Bhagavad Gita is so profound. Aldous Huxley, great writer, and also a devotee of Vedanta and an initiate of Purnananda Swami in California. He said that the Gita is one of the clearest and most comprehensive summaries of the perennial philosophy, as he calls it, ever to have been done. Hence its enduring value, not only for Indians, but for all mankind. And yet even amongst Hindus, we find people unaware. You ask, what is the primary scriptures of Hinduism? They may tell about the Puranas, or they may tell about Mahabharata and so on. And sure enough, Bhagavad Gita is part and parcel of this Mahabharata. So to that extent, they have it right. But there are other texts also. This is a summary text of all the great Vedic texts of Vedanta, namely the Upanishads. We find Swami Vivekananda saying, the Gita can meet psychological requirements of mankind at every level and in every context, an orchestrated symphony of many a spiritual mood and mystic insight. It can, like Sri Krishna's flute, attract and hold entranced anyone in the world, we may add, who has the blessedness of listening to it. So it is a profound text which gives us profound rewards in the shape of practical insights into how we handle life, how we get to grips with the most painful aspects of life. And even these Upanishads were practical. For example, in chanting the Vedas, as was the wont for students, it was advised, please pause and meditate. Meditate on the deities that these hymns are directed to. And meditate on the deep meaning that is there. That is to avoid, of course, a mindless recitation, just doing it out of sheer habit or sheer rote learning, because, of course, that was the way in which people learned in those days. Now we came to a very significant passage within this 15th chapter, and we'll recap a little bit of it. But we come across a beautiful term, jiva. There is a great inquiry among science. What is life? The great Erwin Schrödinger, the great physicist, in the late 1930s, had a number of discussions and talks that came out in a book. And the title of that book was exactly that. What is life? Even today, people are discussing this issue. What is life? If we say that life is a series of responses to the environment, then should we then include all responsive entities? Bacteria, for example. Bacteria know exactly what their environment is, and they tend to adjust their behavior because survival is behind it. How would we explain it? We explain it by an urge to exist. Our fundamental essence is existence. Nobody ever disputes, I exist. And the great philosopher Descartes, even though he brought dualism into philosophy, at least he brought home the idea, the cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. The idea of thinking indicates the idea of existing. Can you ever imagine yourself not existing? Even if you dream that you died, or even think about your death, who is the onlooker? Who is the witness? And the previous chapter, the 14th chapter, was very clear. And even its preceding chapter was clear about a discernment between what is real and what is unreal, or what is seen and what is the seer, what is known and what is the knower. What is the practical application of this? Having said that, the Gita is a practical book, a manual on how to handle your life. All the answers are there, psychological answers, behavioral answers, cultivation of discipline, will. All of this is contained in this Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So what is the spiritual practice that we can glean from this text so far? That we need to cultivate non-attachment. Non-attachment to the objective world that we have confused ourselves into identifying with. And how do we do that? Well, the opposite side of this non-attachment is attachment. For the common person is attachment, loving attachment, surrender, opening your heart fully to the Lord. However you conceive of that entity, that Lord for sure can be talked to, can be listened to, can be walked with, walk on your journey with that entity. When you walk, walk on a journey with him. When you talk, make sure that he is your listening sounding board. Make sure that you are pure in speech. Be mindful. Make your attention tune into this entity. And then we are told in this chapter the example of the Ashwatha tree that can be cut down by this non-attachment. But it tells us about how to view life. Supposing we view life as a totality, not as an individual thing. Most people put themselves in a small corner, a defensive corner, where we have to struggle against other objects and people and places and events and difficult circumstances. Life is painful struggle, people tell me, not knowing that they don't have to frame things in this way. They don't have to live in this small operational circle that we somehow have called life. And so viewing things from the point of view of a totality is a very useful thing. There's a useful example, of course, quoted by Buddhists and Hindus alike, of the 4 blind men who went to investigate what an elephant was. Being blind, they could only assess what the elephant was by touch. By touch, one assessed, oh, an elephant is like a hose pipe. He felt the trunk. An elephant is like a big plantain leaf. He felt the ear. Another one, he felt the leg. It's like a pillar. The one felt the tail. It's like a rope. Of course, all were correct in their own way, but they all only had a partial view of things. They operated from a dimensionally deficient point of view. I mention quite frequently an example, a funny example, of how we are restricted in our vision. And I point out an example, funny example, supposing there were frogs who were scientists. Don't ask me, of course, how scientists or frogs can be scientists, but holding clipboards, and their objective is to study a phenomenon which we call cone, a geometric material shape, an object, which we call cone. A conical shape being there, the first thing that they see when it's introduced into water will be a point. Now bear in mind that they are dimensionally deficient. They cannot see a totality. And therefore they cannot see that something is not evolving when they feel and interpret it's evolving. They engage a professor for the study and they put a point down into the water, dimensionally deficient as they are in this way. They cannot see up, they cannot see down. They can only see horizontally, left and right. And so the first thing they gauge and record is, and the timing of it. This Mr. Cone was born as a point. And a point you can't measure. You have to wait. And in this waiting and in this time, they see a remarkable change taking place, an evolution. This point evolves into something like a circle. Don't forget, they cannot look up, they cannot look down. And they measure this circle with great accuracy, being scientific frogs. And they discuss, how did we see this thing happening? Where was its origin? And how did it change over a period of time? And is its ancestry that of the point? All these things we're able to discuss. And of course, as time goes on, the cone is introduced more and more into the water, never stopping. So they register a graph, change over time. And there they're able to see, oh, this cone evolved into a bigger circle, until eventually the cone is let go into the water completely, and they have to record. With great regret and sadness, at 11 o'clock, this Mr. Cone died. We saw its birth, we witnessed its birth, we witnessed its evolution in time, and now we witnessed its demise. But the fact is, a cone is complete. And with dimensional deficiency, we cannot see the total picture. We are restricted. We only have these 5 photographs of the universe in front of us: eyes, ears, nose, etc., mouth, taste, touch. All this is our restrictive way of interpreting what is in front of us. So when this eternal soul identifies in this way, we call this a jiva, jivatman. Now, this verse goes like this. Mame vamso jivaloke jiva bhutaha sanatanaha manaha shashtani indriyani prakristani karshati. An eternal portion of myself, says Sri Krishna. Having become the jiva in the world of jivas, attracts the senses with the mind as the sixth, abiding in Prakriti. And one of the things that we were discussing last week or the week before, how is it that this jiva, this soul, how is it that can be in any way restricted or sense-bound? The sense-bound soul is the one that is deluded, suffering from ignorance. The definition of ignorance is a forgetfulness of understanding exactly what is contained in this stanza. And this is where all our difficulties and problems arise. But what a profound message is contained here. What is the soul? You see, this question arises in many different people, with many different people in different religious cultures. Where do I go to when I die is a very key question, particularly those who have suffered some bereavement. They say, where did my nephew go when he died? Or where did my son go when he died? Because we evaluate things in terms of spatial terms, in terms of places and times, locations. And of course, theology tells us, oh, heaven, we have many heavens. You can go to any of these heavens if you like. Today I put out a thought, principally orientated toward the question, where does this soul go to when this body passes away? See the term we have, it's an escapist term. It says this body is passing away. We don't want to say it dies, finished, end of it. We have this dramatically calm and satisfying language, satisfying because it avoids the real hard, difficult thing that we have to face. The termination of our own physical being and the termination of those bodies that we are fond of, because we identify them as a living entity. We have every reason to. The eyes shine. When the eyes no longer shine, it is death. When the ears no longer hear, then it is death. When the heart no longer beats, it is death. When the breath no longer expresses itself, it is death. And so if we identify ourselves with this physical entity, with these sense organs, then naturally this question will arise. But the question itself assumes there is something separate. It's a natural assumption because we can never imagine that we will ever die. It's beyond our capacity to imagine because there will always be some witnessing entity. But what a wonderful, wonderful, positive message for us. What are we, even if we assume that we are embodied soul, we are an internal portion of the divine. Think about this now. We can meditate about this. I'm an eternal portion of that ever-living, infinite, invisible entity that we call the divine. What a wonderful thing. What huge potential then is there for me to express this, to manifest this divinity from within. Not just as an end thing, but in the whole process of manifesting. What amount of transformation I can make for myself and others in this. What a wonderful adventure. With what in mind? To understand this very thing, this divine nature that sits within us, that is truly us. And what is the practical benefit of it? When we access that, then we put everything in perspective, and the whole world then changes for the better. And we have the whole capacity and potential to transform our own reality. An eternal portion of myself. Why would an eternal portion of myself, of Krishna, come? And here comes a profound philosophy to play with us. But we don't take it as a play. We take it as a cruel joke on ourselves. We don't think it is the Lord playing with the Lord. The Bhagavatam is very clear about it. I'm not come to play a cruel joke on you. I've come to play my Leela on myself, not on anyone else. Because there's only this one totality, and we don't know it. And as long as we don't know it, we will experience the difficulties and pains of life. And so, this eternal portion of myself, having become, as it were, we have to add, as it were, the jiva, in this world of jiva, this living entity in the world of living entities. How do I evolve, as it were, by attracting the senses toward me? And attracting the mind as a sixth sense. In fact, the mind is really the only sense. Swami Vivekananda in his Raja Yoga points out a very interesting thing. In his day, of course, there were no cars. So he put in this language. If you hear all these carriages rolling down the road, you won't be able to hear my talking. Your listening will be engaged elsewhere. It means your attention will be steered somewhere else, will be beamed in some direction. And the eyes are closed when one's sleeping, but you can find maybe some interested child opening a sleeping man's eyelids The eye looks out at you, the eyeball stares at you, but the sleeping man sees nothing. You see, it requires, as Swami Vivekananda points out, one more component, not just the eyes. It's not the eye that sees or the ear that hears. It is that entity that sits within. It is that ultimately enjoys this listening, this seeing, and it requires the faculty of attention. I can willingly direct my attention elsewhere. What is this freedom of will which sits within us? By whom willed and directed? See, Kashmin no Bhagavatu. In fact, the question arises in the Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, which is itself orientated toward the whole question of a question. Kenishitam patati preshitam manaha kena pranaha pratamaha prati yuktaha. By whom willed and directed does the mind or the attention light on its objects? Like an attention that goes out and sits on an object, like a bee sitting on a flower. And commanded by whom does this life move? The whole life, how is it directed? How does it move? How do we say that a thing is living? Is there something that is willed behind it? At whose will do people utter this speech? And what is the deity that pumps the eye and the ear? Famous response goes, Shrotrasha Shrotram Manasto, because it is that which is the ear of the ear, mind of the mind, speech indeed of the speech, breath of the breath, eye of the eye. Those people who know it, that is the wise, giving up wrong notions of their own self-sufficiency, battling in a corner against all the people and places and events and scenes in front in a defensive way, either yielding to it or confronting it or running away from it, giving up wrong notions of their self-sufficiency and departing from this world, they become immortal. The goal is immortality. Ask any Hollywood star if they wish to be immortal. Their reputation, they wish to be immortal. And their looks, they're aiming for immortality too. Of course, it's not possible. And why isn't it possible? Because abiding in nature, and nature has a process. Birth, life, and death is a process. We can see the idea of this, a drop of rainwater is different and separate. It's not salty like the sea, and it falls into the sea. But what we call the Jivatman, combining these two terms, Jiva and Atman, is never an entity separate or independent of, we can call it the Paramatman. Just as a wave is evermore part of the sea, the individual soul is eternally part and parcel of what we call Ishvara, the Lord or God. But why do we say Jivatman? What is this Jivatman? What is this soul? The soul, or the Jivatman, is the one, the individual, supposedly, who thinks through ignorance that he is bound in Prakriti, in nature. Bound because nature itself, as we've discussed previously, is comprising of these three strands, these three ropes called guna. And these gunas bind us. But how can we bind an entity that is free? You are unbound. Then the question is, how is it that I have a felt binding? How is it that I feel bound to this body, bound to this mind, bound to this conditioning, bound to these habitual things in life? I don't feel free. And this is, therefore, the position of Jivatman. But you're free. There are many animals that get trapped. A good hunter may devise a certain trap whereby a bird or some kind of animal can get into the trap, but doesn't know how to get out through the same entry point and remains there. A fish, for example, that has, and some have, the capacity to jump out of the net. Knowingly, they can jump out. This is a Sri Ramakrishna example of different kinds of fish. Some dig back into the mud. These ones, of course, are full of tamas, full of darkness and ignorance. They bury their head in the sand, pretending that all is well. How much are we like this? And then there are ones who desperately try and jump out. But then the ones who actually jump out, they know they are free, eternal free souls. We are eternally free. When a dialogue in the Gospel of Ramakrishna comes about, how can I now transform my life? I'm a mere sinner. No. A cave that has been dark for 1,000 years, how long does it take to light? It can be lit in an instant. You strike a match and there it is. It has nothing to do with the age of the cave. It has nothing to do with the darkness. There's an Irish saying, it is better to light a match than curse the dark, or light a candle than curse the dark. But it's not a question of doing something like that. It's a question of creating a condition in the mind to such an extent that this revelation of our own freedom gets exposed as it is. It is already there. We are already free. The door is already open. Like an elephant, when it is being trained, it's tied with a chain. And even when the chain is off its foot, it feels it cannot go a further step. So this identification with nature makes us evolve the senses and the mind. Instead of registering these as instruments, the mind is an instrument, the body is an instrument. We can revalue it as God's earth car. The body is God's earth car made from food. And the mind is the Lord's sitting room. When we revalue things in this way, then things change. And we cease to become bhokta. Bhokta or a bhogin. That is one who is indulgent in the external world. Instead of that, we can make our reassessment and become a yogi. What is a yogi? A yogi is one who chooses to refrain from the activities of the senses. His preparation or her preparation for identification with this supreme entity, this Paramatman, is in direct proportion to control of the senses that he exercises. Because the senses are instruments. We don't identify with a telescope when we look through the telescope at the stars. We can look through the telescope. We can look at the telescope also and away from it. We're not bound by the telescope. One who knows this will use the telescope or look at the telescope or discard it, put it to one side and look at other things. That freedom is there. So what is the relationship then with this bound jiva, this jivatman? That is with this free entity that has associated or misassociated. What is the difference, or what is the relationship between this soul and Paramatman, the supreme entity, the supreme self, the supreme principle, this Purushottama? The relationship is analogous to space. We find space in a pot, what we call, Gata Akasha, as opposed to Mahakasha, all the great space outside the pot. What is the relationship between the space inside the pot and the space outside the pot? Is the same question. Well, when the pot is gone, analogous to the human body, then the one merges in the other. There was never any separation, only a seeming separation. Seeming because this body is there for a mere 5 minutes. We don't know exactly how long. Maybe another 10, 15 years, who knows? maybe longer. Maybe there's a full life from birth to death of 100 years. We have no way of knowing. An interesting question that I often ask in study groups to make this point about our ephemeral nature, the nature of the human body, is to ask a question. Please assess, how long do you think this body will last? Of course, the older generation will have a more acute awareness of it, that there's the finishing line somewhere. But the younger generation would never have thought of it. I have my whole life ahead of me, say they. And so they don't know where to start. So I have to guide them through a process. Tell me, what is the average for, if you're a man, or the average for a woman, if you're a woman, your average lifespan in the country where you live? All right. So you have a good chance of living to that average. But it's a shocking statement to make when people have never thought of this issue. But when we understand, I am full and free and perfect, nothing to achieve or attain. I'm simply like the air in a pot. And when the pot is smashed, that air merges with the great Mahagasha. So that is the reality of it. The form Akasha, the Gata Akasha, the one in the pot, has a feeling of individuality, but it's not really there. And so even so, the Paramatman alone is the eternal truth, putting on now and then the appearance of Jivatman, that is, an eternal portion of myself, has become, as it were, the Jiva in the world of Jivas. Sri Ramakrishna has this to say. The real nature of the Jivatman is Sat Chit Ananda. But through egoism, he has assumed several upadis, limiting adjuncts, and has forgotten his real nature. We have to understand what that means. You see, there's an electrical current flowing through the electromagnetic wave system. When we hook in a certain restricting device, a kind of funneling device for its energy, we come up with light through a light bulb, or heat through a radiator, or maybe put it through coils at the back of a fridge, and we have the effect of coldness. Or we can use it to make a rotating mechanism as a fan, or we can use it to drive a motor and drive a number of different pulley systems. It depends on what adapter we put on. And so whenever we look around, we see these limiting adjuncts, upadi. And these limiting adjuncts, upadi, will be the interpretative faculty of what's in front of you. For example, the analogy of a light bulb, the light bulb may one day declare, I alone produce this light. Until you give it an ego jar, you give it a jarring note and say, well, very well, I'll listen to you for a while, but then I'll disconnect you. That is, I'll switch the switch off. And having switched the connection, the electrical connection that connects to that light bulb is finished. It's gone. The light is gone. Supposing a lamp has a certain ego and declares, I'm the one that lights the entire room. And with a certain sense of humor, you allow it to say it for a while and then disconnect it. And then reconnect it and said, what became? You had a near-death experience, I suppose. So how does the Jivatman assume these upadis, these limiting adjuncts, and understanding that the real nature of the Jivatman is this Sat Chit Ananda, that is, this existence. We cannot deny that we exist. Even any inquiry about it results in I exist. You can doubt anything in the world, but you cannot doubt I exist. And that Chit, it is conscious. That is, there is a certain, when we say, what is life? Some people respond to say, an entity that seems to voluntarily react to something. But who's to say that is a definition? wherever you find any reaction, even the principle of survival or struggle, it is because there is consciousness there. What is consciousness is a big issue today in neurobiology and in philosophy and in modern science, because modern science figures that consciousness is in this upadhi that we call brain, and that it is a phenomena of it. It must be, since we're not entitled to go beyond any other material, any other explanation except a material or materialist one. And so Ananda comes the next, that it is full of joy. Why should we go to this route? Why should we even have a sense of joy? Why should we have emotions that give us happiness and joy? Why should we seek for happiness? It's because our own nature is this Ananda, is this bliss, this joy. We are simply want to get back to our own inherent nature. Shariram yad avapnuti yachcha pyut kramati shvaraha grhitvai tani samyati vayu gandan iva shayat. Shariram, a body, when it obtains, when the Lord obtains a body, and when he leaves it, bear in mind the previous passage, when the Lord obtains a body, and when he leaves it, he takes these, what? These senses. He takes these and goes, just as the wind carries the scents from their sources. This vayu, just as the vayu takes the gandhan, the scents, even so, the ashayat from their seats. Flowers, of course, have scents, but the wind doesn't have a scent of its own. It has no smell. It's a carrier. And so just as the wind carries all these senses and scents from flowers, all these fragrances go off. The wonderful, wonderful, beautiful, poetic example. In answer to the question, where does the soul go? Well, it doesn't go anywhere, but it continues to stay and gathers toward itself all these various experiences, all these senses and the mind. Bearing in mind, senses are a part of the mind. The only thing that has gone is the instrumentality of the body, and carries them forward just as the wind carries the scents of flowers. And of course, the Jivatman here is called the Lord because of its suzerainty, of its royal administration, or if you like, of the body itself and the senses. The Atman assumes these upadhis, these limiting adjuncts, because of its attachment to life that we call nature. Thinking that it is something separate from us, we cling to it, not knowing its reality. We identify with it, we get mixed up with it. This is true nature of delusion. But as he detaches himself from it, he resumes his contentless consciousness. Even now, when you detach yourself, you have a contented consciousness. But when we get mixed up with it, this consciousness becomes restless. However, as long as it keeps up this concern with nature and all its difficulties and problems as something separate, and he behaves a bit like a magician with this equipment. This world is like a magic show. Somewhere he spreads out his few things and shows his magic performance. And then he bundles up his belongings and goes on to another place, another carnival area, if you like, to put on another show. Similarly, in this same way, just like that, a good example, the Jivatman spreads out his senses, mind, and all his limiting adjuncts, or what we might see on the other side of it as adapters. And when he takes birth in one place, he takes them all with him. He withdraws them at the death, only to project them again in another birth. And this withdrawal and projection is the nature of nature itself. This one entity associated with nature makes this withdrawal, makes this projection, not only here in this small, small sphere, in this small circle that we call life, but in the grander circle of what we call nature or the universe. You know, this system is the only system that says there is no origin or beginning. There is only a repeated eternal series of cycles. Right now, cosmology has an awkwardness called a singularity. Seeing the awkwardness, many scientists are turning to the whole idea of a cyclic universe that goes on eternally, a kind of cyclic steady state model. And where do we find a similarity? This ancient understanding that there's a kind of breathing in and breathing out, a projection and a withdrawal in alternative steps or stages. What does the Jivatman do with the senses? What action does he perform? That's a question. So presiding over the ear, the eye, just as we find in the Kena Upanishad, I'm the eye of the eye, I'm the ear of the ear, I'm touch of touch, etc., and the taste of taste, the smell of smell, the mind of the mind. I experience all these objects around me. I am the real experiencer, says the Jivatman. Shrotram chakshuha spashanam charasanam granam evacha adhishtaya manaschayam Vishayan upasevati. Presiding. I preside only over the ear, the eye, the touch, the taste, the smell, and also the mind. In this way, I experience all the objects, and therefore these are reporting mechanisms. The external world is brought in through the senses, interpreted and classified in the mind, and presented to this supreme self that sits simply presiding, witnessing and enjoying, and then going back again in an efferent current. The Jivatman is cherished by all these 6 instruments, keeping that entity in contact, reporting to that. Here is the link between the external world and the inmost, deepest resident, and the messengers are the sense organs, including the mind. But utkramantam stitam vapi punchanam va gunarvitam vimudha na upashyanti pashyanti jnana chakshushaha. The deluded. Who are the deluded? The deluded are those called vimutaha, because of their ignorance in regard to the self, the immortal self, this supreme Atman. The deluded do not see the one who departs, the soul that departs, does not see this entity when it stays, when it enjoys, who is conjoined with the gunas, as it were, and associated with him. But they see the secrets of these things, who possess what? Not the physical eyes, but the internal eye of intuition and wisdom. What we have designated something like a third eye, the eye of intuition. There was a series of popular stories way back, I think it was 1960s or so, a series of books with a supposed Tibetan Lama called Robsang Lampa, I think his name was, or Rampa, something like that. And it was purely fiction, but people took it so seriously. They thought it was real events, and he describes himself as his experiences as a Tibetan Lama. And then he describes Today I was taught how to access my third eye. You take a chisel and a hammer like that, and you chisel it through. Something of that nature. Of course, it's nothing like that, but people take these kinds of things. Inside there is something like a third eye. We've seen it in diagrams. New Age people tell me it's there. Some other people long back, maybe 100 years ago, misunderstood these kinds of things. The yogi language for intuition. When we see eye opening, this Ajna chakra opening, this eye of intuition, we then see all these things that the deluded fail to see because they're orientated externally to the external world. They don't look inward. Now, these deluded people, of course, will remain deluded. And we know from a thought that I issued today that has a continuation of a theme in answer to a question. Where do these souls depart to? And going through a series of events that are around a kind of series of analogies involving fire. Fire being the messenger between the mortals and the deities and the Supreme God. Fire carries all our prayers and intentions, was the idea of the ancients. And that is why Agni was so honored in the Vedic texts, because it gives us this transition, just as the eye makes the transition between the photons that hit the eyeball and what we see and how we interpret what we see. How light is split up in this way. And without the mind, we can't do it. The mind is a splitter, is a fragmenter. It is the mind that acts like a prism, where we are able to see things in a divided way. And so those people who take this as absolutely real, take materialism to be real, don't know these answers to the questions, come to a conclusion, or ignore the fact of this. These are what we call deluded, in contrast to what some materials call delusion. There's a famous book, Richard Dawkins, The God Delusion. All right. A good counterbook may well be The World Delusion. God being the only reality, actually. But you don't know it. Why? Because you only take what the senses report and don't go any further investigation. So it is a kind of delusion, limited and defective, as the senses are. Can only have a certain range of understanding, not being able to catch subtle things. We can't see what a gamma ray is. We can't see with the eyes what an X-ray is. We don't know about infrared and ultraviolet except with instrumentation. It's beyond our range. Supersonic, subsonic. Our ears are not designed to catch it. Other animals may have that. They're not standard organs. And so these are limited and give us a limitation on our whole view of this totality. Cognizing and contacting the self who stays in the body, enjoys the objects presented, and departs from the body when it becomes unfit for occupation, that is old and rusty, the earth car is gone. Get a new car, that's the idea, and progress along your journey, understanding that all the fruits of your karma you can't exhaust in one life alone for most people. And you have the capacity. Indeed, it is urged, get this freedom now. What do we mean by get this freedom now? Are we not free already? Yes. That means stay where you are and get rid of this delusion. And when you get rid of this delusion, what is there is revealed. Cognition of the self alone, in fact, is real cognition. And that is possible to only those who have this intuitive faculty, this eye of wisdom. Sri Ramakrishna says this. The human beings are all like pillows, varying in their external appearances. One is red, another blue, a third is yellow or black. But the stuff inside all of them is the same silk cotton. A beautiful example. Similarly, he says, some men are fair in color, while others are ugly, probably me. And some are good-tempered, and others are bad-tempered, probably me again. Still the same Ishvara, Lord, resides in the hearts of all of them. A very interesting question when you bring out these ideas. Seeing the self in all beings and all beings in self, seeing the kingdom of heaven within, understanding that all are made in the image and likeness of God, having the ability and the practice, the practical implementation of seeing it, feeling it, responding to it. Can we see this in a devilish person, in a mass murderer, or somebody who has the characteristics of an aberration of behavior, somebody who we can classify as evil? Can we still see this? But the answer is yes. Love your neighbor as yourself, because your neighbor is indeed yourself. But just a different guy is there, a different behavior is there. Should we judge or criticize it? On the surface, we can correct it. On the surface, we can avoid it. On the surface, we can maneuver around it in a sensible way. But deep down, our vision should be a penetrating one, and there we should see this Lord of the universe sitting there. And that alone has an internal transformational effect, and externally also has a transforming effect, something that we call spiritual healing. How to obtain the eye of wisdom? How would we do that? What process should we? Yatanto yoginas chainam pashyanti atmanya avastitam. Yatanto pyakritatmano nainam pashyanti pashantya chetasha. Yes, we have to strive for it. First word is yantataha, striving. The yogis, the yogins, yoginaha, those who strive, endued with yoga. What is the yoga? That is the reassessment that allows us to tune in to the glory of the self. Cognizing him, dwelling in the self, having this awakened understanding that I've just described. Though striving still, trying to exert the strength of will necessary and discipline necessary, those people who are trying to do this and yet struggling to do it, striving with a goal in mind, striving but not really cognizing that deep inner self. The unrefined and unintelligent see him not. Where is God? I don't see him. It is because you lack purity of mind. And what is this purity of mind? You, first of all, you're striving for something. When you strive for something, it's equivalent to say, I haven't got it. I make an effort to get something in the future. Dealing with the whole of spiritual life the same kind of way as we deal with a career or a job. No, it's not like that. You don't have to achieve what you already have. It is there already. The unrefined, the rough person who responds to nature and does not bother to curtail the senses. And the unintelligent not because they lack any kind of normal sort of intelligence where we work out things in an abstract way, we investigate mathematical formulas and science, and where we structure a kind of strategy to survive in life. Not that kind of intelligence. Unintelligent because they didn't see the subtle causal aspect of it. They didn't see how the thing that they're responding to is shuffling and changing and appearing and disappearing and has no fundamental reality to it. Not understanding that that is the cause of your struggle and difficulty and pain. See, the act of striving is common both to the yogi and to the non-yogi. And nothing, of course, can be achieved without working for it. We're not saying you don't work for it. But the unrefined and the unintelligent, they labor in a wrong way. They labor to do with the external reality of the world. And it is not well established in self-control if you do that. Spiritual egoism lurks in his heart, even for those people who say, I want to be religious, I want to be spiritual. And then look, I'm much more spiritual than that fellow there. I've been practicing Vedanta for all these years. I've been doing all the right things. I have a guru. This person, they just newcomers to this. That kind of spiritual egoism can be there, even in the most experienced spiritual practitioners. That is one great obstacle, a pride in your so-called spiritual attainment. See, pride and conceit, these are the things that alienate a person from others. And they are a very key obstacle in the way of this realization. So such a person, though struggling and endeavoring in the spiritual line all through life, doesn't develop the eye of wisdom. That's the thing that's necessary. All the external things, as long as we are oriented toward the external things, even for religious or spiritual purposes, we cannot develop this eye of wisdom that requires the internal ego to let go and surrender, to drop off, to become an opening thing rather than a closing thing, to be a freeing thing rather than a constricting thing. So, but the yogi, of course, is engaged in all humility, that is the ego aside, in the welfare of all, not just in my own attainment, in my own spiritual life. When will I get my realization? When will I get my moksha? When will I stop incarnating? So, and he subordinates the individual will to the will of the Lord. Thy will be done. Unreservedly doing this. Surrender, attitude of surrender. In our Vedanta series on Sunday, we mentioned this aspect of surrender. How can we surrender? What does surrender mean? We dealt with the subject. The purity of the mind marks that entity, that person of realization, or the yogi who is close to that. And he therefore develops this eye of wisdom. This internal light opens up. And this happens by itself as a matter of course when the mind is pure. Sri Ramakrishna says, all water leaks away, even if there is a minute hole in a water pot. And in that way, in that manner, even if there be a trace of earthly attachment in the mind of a sadhaka, all his spiritual practices come to nothing. There's a wonderful song many, many years back, a popular song called There's a Hole in My Bucket. It's a dialogue between two people. And there's a hole in my bucket. Well, fetch me some water, but there's a hole in the bucket, And so it becomes a frustrating thing. And the whole thing becomes a circular situation. It's the same thing with us. We have all these holes. It's not that we have a holy bucket in terms of sacredly holy bucket, but we have a bucket full of holes. And we try to patch these holes up. This is our error. We don't have to do this. Now, what is it that the intuitive knows, these whose eyes have been opened, of Paramatma and behold, will deal with this aspect of immanence of the Paramatma, which goes from the 12th stanza to the 15th next week. And we'll conclude there now. So don't forget that there are many events we have on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're interested in more of these talks, and also talks from Swami Vimokshananda of our Area Vedanta Society. We have a website, of course, as well, and we are currently doing renovations. And so if you feel that you need to donate and thanks to those who have donated, then look at our website and you'll be able to see how to donate. In the meantime, until next week, or until you tune into some other event on this channel, I bid you good night. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. And finally, before I say a final farewell, it is very often useful to see what is the practical aspects of these talks. Philosophy should be thoroughly practical. And if there's something that you got practically from this, I'd advise you, note it down, think about it, reflect on it, and share it with others.